Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Linux and open source news show. This week we've got Intel unfortunately reconsidering their open source policy and deciding to focus their open source efforts on stuff that only benefits them, which is not really the open source ethos. We also have the release of Ubuntu 25.10 and a new interesting, well, sort of vague project called the LibrePhone to try and finally crack open that smartphone market with open source software. And of course we also have a bunch of stuff on the EU chat control law, on the Cyber Resiliency Act, on Windows 11 doubling down on online accounts, and more. And we also have this sponsor to our segue. This sponsor to our segue. Sorry, I'm keeping this one in. So this video is sponsored by TuxCare, and you probably know about them if you're a regular watcher of this channel. They offer solutions to automate the maintenance and security of your open source stack with rebootless patching. They also offer enterprise support for Alma Linux and Rocky Linux, and they have endless lifecycle support that delivers long-term patching for end-of-life versions of Linux distros, open source apps, runtimes, and libraries. And speaking of which, they now offer endless lifecycle support for OpenJDK, specifically for versions 1.7.0, 1.8.0, 11, and 17. This means you can stick to the version of OpenJDK you currently use and still receive security updates for as long as you need without costly code rewrites and while staying compliant with your own regulatory and audit obligations. This either gives you time to prepare a migration to a newer version of OpenJDK and to port your own applications, or you can just stick with what works without upgrading without any time limit. These end-of-life versions of OpenJDK are supported on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, CentOS, Alma Linux, Rocky Linux, Oracle Linux, Debian, and Ubuntu. And TuxCare just so happens to offer that same endless support for end-of-life versions of Red Hat, Ubuntu, CentOS Stream, Oracle Linux, and tons of open source tools like .NET, Spring, AngularJS, PHP, Python, and a lot more. So as always, check out TuxCare's endless lifecycle support by clicking the link in the description. So, apparently Intel is reconsidering their position on open source. They've had some mass layoffs happening this year, with many Intel projects left without maintainers, and many drivers for Linux being abandoned as well. The latest in that long list is Kan Liang, a longtime Intel Linux engineer who worked on networking performance and performance monitoring, who is no longer at Intel. But on top of that, Intel leadership made some statements during their Intel Tech Tour Arizona that left a lot of the open source community baffled. They say that they need to find a balance on where they use their open source software as an advantage to Intel, and not let everyone else take it and run with it, which, said like that, is pretty opposed to the ethos of open source. They also said that they are very proud of their open source contributions and that they are going to continue contributing, but only where it gives them an edge against everyone else. So basically, the way I see it, it feels like Intel only wants to have open source software where they could benefit from contributions from the community, but they don't want to open source anything anymore where they know either the community won't really help them or that could be used by their competitors as well. And that is at complete odds with their track record. They've been a pretty good citizen on Linux, and with their tools, frameworks, and libraries, they've open sourced most of what let their CPUs and GPUs run properly, and most of what lets people take advantage of those hardware features. Intel wrote another statement after the coverage of these initial statements started popping up, saying that they do remain deeply committed to open source, but that they're sharpening their focus on where and how they contribute, which is basically doubling down on what they said. Now, it is a bit worrying. Intel is not really doing great right now, and as always, when a company starts plummeting, executives look at the work they're doing. Executives generally don't know much about open source, so all they see is, why are we giving away our code to everyone else? And that's where they start cutting corners. The issue is, a lot of the goodwill Intel accumulated over the years is because they were a very good open source citizens. If you take a look, for example, at NVIDIA and AMD in terms of GPUs, for a long time, NVIDIA was the best choice. Price for performance, they just beat AMD soundly for multiple years. But on Linux, most people still use AMD devices, not just on the desktop, but also on server farms and on data centers. Unless you really needed CUDA, the fact that AMD was a good open source citizen meant that the support was better, and if you encountered any problem or anything you needed to upgrade or work with, you could do it yourself or ask them or ask the community or sponsor someone, something you could not do with NVIDIA. Meaning technically people picked an inferior product, but because their open source contributions were so good, people preferred working with that. If Intel shuts the door on open source, they might also shut the door on a lot of Linux usage, and that doesn't sound good at all. Now this week, Ubuntu 25.10 was released. I already made a video about it on the channel. You can go check it out if you want all the details, but basically it is GNOME 49, still on that Frankenstein model where they don't ship certain features like the donations banner or GNOME calendar being stuck on an older version, but they also improved what they shipped, like their Yaru theme. They removed the startup apps utility and used some settings instead, which does lose you some features, which isn't great. They replaced initramfs tools by Dracut. They replaced the GNU core utils with Rust-based versions. They replaced sudo. Well, they ship sudo Rust as well as a replacement for sudo if you want that. They replaced their network time protocol utility as well. And they ship a bunch of new applications like Loop being now in the default selection, Ptixis being the new default terminal. And you get the kernel 6.17, the latest versions of the Mesa drivers, the NVIDIA drivers, and also the latest versions of systemd. You also lose access to the X11 session in GNOME, but that's a GNOME change, not necessarily specifically an Ubuntu one. They just went along with it. Now apparently there's also an issue with Flatpaks not working at all currently on Ubuntu 25.10. You can install Flatpak itself, it's not pre-installed obviously, but app installs through Flatpak will fail because of an app armor profile error. It just lacks the required permissions to function properly. The fix is marked as critical, so it will be fixed, and you can disable the app armor profile in the meantime, although this will lessen security for Flatpak apps. Now, if you want all the details on the GNOME version, you can check out my video on the channel, and as usual, if you are upgrading in place, it's always worth it to wait a few days or a few weeks just to make sure that all the kinks are ironed out. It's not a bad version of Ubuntu, but it does make some structural changes which might affect people more than usual, so do some double checking before you upgrade, or at least test it on a live USB. Now, the Free Software Foundation celebrated its 40th birthday over the weekend, which itself is of no real consequence, but they took the opportunity through their newly elected president, Ian Kelling, to announce the LibrePhone initiative. This is a new project from the Free Software Foundation to try and increase software freedom on smartphones, which is cool because I talked exactly about that same topic in this week's patroncast for YouTube members and Patreon supporters. I recorded it before I learned about this LibrePhone thing, so that just slotted in nicely. The goal seems to be to create a fully free and open platform for smartphones from the firmware to the OS itself, and I would assume the default apps as well. We already have plenty of open interfaces, as in plenty of UI, but none really work on a fully open system. Generally, the firmware isn't open, or the underlying system is sort of based on Android, like Ubuntu Touch often is, with some proprietary blobs. So this project could be cool if it ends up going anywhere. Now, details are pretty limited right now. We don't know if it's going to be Linux-based or something else. We don't know which UI it will use, or if they're gonna try and write a brand new one. Is it going to just be an operating system based without any graphical interface, and you'll be able to pick the one you want with specific distros? We don't really know. It might not go anywhere. It is a big thing to tackle, but if it succeeds, that would be really cool, because I'm getting really tired with those lockdown Android and iOS systems that do everything they can to restrict your capabilities and your freedom to install and use whatever you want. Now, companies and organizations keep warning against the EU's chat control law. If you don't know, the European Commission, under the guise of child safety, is trying to implement a way to scan all EU citizens' messages which would obviously mean all messaging platforms will have to open a backdoor into their encryption services, which is terrible for cybersecurity, but is also a big privacy invasion that could open the door to way worse uses of that scanning. Once you start scanning for any reason, you can decide to scan for political opinions or sexual orientations, religious tendencies, whatever else you could use to discriminate against certain groups of people. Signal specifically is warning against it this time, but they're the latest in a long line of companies and organizations to do so. They think this is basically spyware, saying that the idea a device could scan content before it's encrypted negates the purpose of encryption. Signal said that they would leave the EU if this law goes into effect, rather than weakening their own encryption. Now, thankfully, Germany decided to side against that EU chat control law. They were one of the major deciding factors on whether this extremely problematic and invasive law would be passed, and they now chose to oppose it. As they say, it would be like opening all letters as a precautionary measure just to see if there's anything illegal in them. They say it's not acceptable and that they won't allow it. Since the law requires a blocking minority to be rejected, the parliament needs 4 countries at least that oppose this regulation, and these countries must represent at least 35% of the EU's population. Germany represents apparently 19% of the EU's population alone, so combined with the Netherlands and Poland, who also oppose the law, this should be enough to block it. So that's a relief. This thing was an awful first step towards mass surveillance of EU citizens, so it being sort of blocked is good. It probably also would have resulted in a lot of companies just stopping their services in the EU because they wouldn't have wanted to weaken their privacy measures or their encryption measures. So that's really, really nice. These sort of laws are going to keep popping up again and again because some people really want to read what you have to say on every topic. But fortunately for now, it seems to be pushed back. Now, Elementary OS got some nice monthly updates to share with the first stable release of their own Maps application. This is an evolution of an app called Atlas, and it's now ported to GTK 4, and it is now an official application for Elementary OS. It lets you search for places and go to your current location. It doesn't seem to do directions right now. It is a very simple app, probably meant more as a way to open map links into a dedicated application than a replacement to visiting Google Maps or something else. The App Center now also shows a percentage for ratings, where these ratings are available on app pages. So you'll see, for example, 62%, which means 62% of users gave a positive rating. App pages have a more compact layout as well, and licensing details are more fleshed out on those pages. When a game in the App Center supports controllers, you'll also get that same information underneath the screenshot with a nice little icon, and application add-ons are also now supported in that same App Center. Updates should also be faster thanks to a massive rewrite of that backend code, and the installed applications view now shows apps sorted by their recent update instead of alphabetically. All such results will also use a 2-column view if space permits it. They also updated their dock to support background applications. This is the same feature that GNOME has in its quick settings menu, and you now get a little folder showing these background apps running in the Elementary OS dock, which is cool. You can click on a little red icon to force quit them from there. The login and lock screen can now support automatic accent colors and dark mode, and your transparency and power settings are also carried over to that login and lock screen. Now that's for what Elementary OS users got this month, which is a lot. And as per the next steps, the dock will have better translucency with background blur, and the same goes for notifications. And you'll be able to disable those settings if you don't like the look. Fingerprint support is also coming in the user settings, which is very nice, and the Wayland session has now been promoted to the default in daily builds because it's pretty much ready. That's a pretty big number of changes out there, and Elementary OS seems to be catching up to at least the level of GNOME. I know it's not for everyone, I know some people don't like the look or don't like the limited feature set, but I still think it is a very cohesive and nice experience, and seeing them be able to ship that many updates is pretty reassuring. There's another potential reason to quit Microsoft and move to Linux. Microsoft is doubling down on their online account requirement to run Windows 11. Now, Windows 11 already asked you to sign up or to sign into a Microsoft account. You could no longer create a local account, and that's been the case for a while, but there was a way to bypass that using a little command line and the registry, even though I'm sure most people who use Windows just didn't think there was a way to escape that. Microsoft is now removing the mechanisms that allow for a local account in their installer. The reason they give is pretty much bullshit. It's that sometimes if you did that, it could skip critical setup screens, resulting in a device that is not fully configured, but I don't think that is true at all. The only thing these mechanisms bypassed was the fact that you were or were not connected to the internet, and if you had zero access to the internet, you could create a local account. So the only thing you could skip is internet configuration, which is not a problem if you're plugged into Ethernet, because that's automatic even on Windows, or configuring a Wi-Fi network, which you can do yourself on your own desktop once you're logged in. I used this trick to install many Windows 11 VMs, and it never broke anything. Now, this is at least being tested by Microsoft. The removal of these registry entries is not published to Windows 11 yet, and it would only affect new installs, but that's still a lot of installs. Any new PC being sold would basically force their buyer to create an account now. Now, no one is really surprised by this move. Microsoft has been trying to force people into using a Microsoft account for the longest time. They want to link everything you do in Edge with your browsing data, all the telemetry, and all the stuff that you entered into that account to your account so they can just sell that data or access to that data to advertisers. That's their business model. That's how they make a lot of money. Hopefully, at some point, people realize this is not okay and they will ditch Windows. I'm perfectly aware not everyone is able to ditch Windows, but a lot of people could and aren't, so maybe this will push more people over the edge. Who knows? Now, something that made me laugh, Firefox got some accolades, getting a special mention from Time magazine for having one of the best inventions of 2025. Now, if you're wondering what is that special invention, it is shaking your smartphone with the Firefox app open to summarize an article. Yes, that's the invention. You shake your phone and you get an AI summary of the article you're currently viewing. According to Time magazine, this is worth a special mention in the best inventions list. An invention that only works on iOS and only for English users right now. Although on that special mentions list, they also include using your smartwatch as a mouse, as a super cool invention, a small electric razor, a Polaroid camera, a phone with a big camera, some AI tools that lets you see how clothes fit instead of, going and trying them on, or I kid you not, there is a spoon that shocks your tongue to replace the taste of salt. Now, at least Firefox is getting a profile manager. This has been in the works for a while and it's finally coming to all users in a few days. You'll be able to create multiple profiles with their own bookmarks, history, extensions, and themes, and they're all designed with privacy in mind. There's no data linked to these profiles that is being collected. This is a good feature that most other browsers had for a while, but it's nice to see it coming to Firefox as well. Now, I know I've been harsh on all these invention things, but it really doesn't feel like any of that serves any purpose. It's just trying to do something we've known how to do for years in a less convenient way and with technology added where technology wasn't really needed. I don't know, it just feels like bling for the sake of bling. But hopefully this mention puts Firefox back into some people's radar. Maybe it helps getting some little tiny bit of market share back. I don't know, it just feels like a very pointless feature. Now, something I missed at the end of last month, that's about the Cyber Resiliency Act in the EU. This thing raised a lot of questions when it was introduced, specifically for open source projects, because it was expected to add a lot of admin burden on the shoulders of open source developers, a lot of paperwork. It would force developers to take responsibility for vulnerabilities, to document and maintain everything that they fixed or didn't fix, and also document their entire software supply chain, their focus on security. Everything would have to be fully documented and accessible. This would be difficult to accomplish for a lot of open source projects that just have one volunteer or two maintainers, and it would also mean big companies could become wary of using open source software to build their own stuff because it would place that admin burden on them. It is hard enough to document all your own code, but if you also have to do it with all the FOSS code that you plug into your own infrastructure that you didn't produce yourself, it gets impossible. But Koah Hartman, who is Linus's number 2 on the Linux kernel, gave a talk at the end of September talking about this, and he seems to think it's all going to be fine. First, he says that companies, yes, they will have to document their open source dependencies, which is good, because it means we can know what open source software is being used and who breaks the licenses. Second, he says that individual volunteers don't really have to worry that they're not liable for anything as long as the software they make isn't sold or monetized. If a software project is monetized, only the organization that manages that is liable to all these duties and admin work, not the individuals themselves, although in a lot of cases the individual is the organization, I'd say. Greg says that the workload is not huge if you already follow good development practices in terms of documentation. The security focus of all this regulation will also, according to Greg, push companies to use actively supported projects, or at least to stick to mainstream code and to the communities around them, because these communities would handle a lot of that paperwork and documentation burden, where a fork or a small project likely would not be able or not be willing to do all of that work. As per making companies wary of open source to avoid being held liable for code they didn't write, Greg thinks that this will not happen. He actually says it might be the opposite, since companies will control their code base more with open source than if they relied on proprietary software, because they actually have the option to contribute or to fix stuff or to help, where they would be fully dependent on the software vendor to get the work done if they paid for proprietary software instead. He concludes by saying he talked to representatives in the EU that created this law. He says that they understand open source and that they don't want to see it harmed at all. Now that's certainly reassuring. I would think Koah Hartman is a trusty source on this. If he says that this will not affect projects too much, I tend to believe him. But also there might be a bias here. Greg works mostly on the Linux kernel, and that is a gigantic project, maybe the biggest software project out there. So maybe his vision is biased towards that size instead of just seeing like the volunteer developer monetizing their app through a Patreon, getting like $10 per month and having to document a lot of stuff on their free time, which takes away time from the code. We'll see if this actually is a problem or not, but I do tend to trust Koah Hartman on this. I think if there was something super fishy or difficult, he would have spoken up against that. And I'll personally speak up in favor of our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. You all know about Tuxedo by now. They are the only manufacturer I use daily. All the stuff that you see from me is run on one of their computers, and all my gaming needs are served by one of their desktops as well. They make laptops and desktops, all form factors, all sizes, all price points that run Linux out of the box. The hardware is picked specifically because it is very Linux compatible. They have tons of options, tons of choices. You can browse the website to find something that suits you. They ship to most countries in the world. They're based in Germany. They're just really, really cool. The link, as always, is in the description. They've been sponsoring the channel for more than 3 years now, so I think this gives you a good indication on how reliable they can be. Anyway, this will conclude today's episode. I hope you enjoyed watching it or listening to it in the background. You know where all the usual YouTube buttons and links and comment sections are. You know why you should take 5 seconds to click on one of those buttons or write something even stupid in the comments. Who cares? It helps YouTube think that my videos are good, which is at least one person thinking they're good. Anyway, thank you all for watching. You can support the show. Links in the description as always. I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!